In this 5 parts of this video, so this video series, we'll be working on the favorites. So adding meals to favorites, removing them from favorites, and making sure that okay, when you log in, log out, okay, it's when you log in, let's say it's going to direct you to the home page, and then you cannot add favorites unless you are logged in. All right. So in the last part, we deal with authentication. So right now I'm logged in. Okay. So I can log out, and we will add now favorites to our user model. So if you look at here, what we have right now, we have the token, we have the password, and we have the email. But we want when you look at see more, so it should give you this option to add to your favorites. So right now it's like save changes, but we'll change it to say add to favorites. All right. So just do one thing here. Okay. Right. So now when we click on save changes, it doesn't do anything because this should be actually add to favorites. So add to favorites. All right. And then this is going to change. So depending on if the user is there. So we'll say here, if there is a user, we'll add to the favorites. But the user here is in our context. So we can take the user from the context by saying const, okay, we take the user equals by using the context, and the context is going to be the app context. All right, so this app context coming from not this one, the context, yeah, not the app context but the my context. So we can say my context here, my context. Okay, so now you have access to the user, and you will say, okay, if there is a user, so we'll show this add to favorites button. So now, unless we are logged in, so right now I'm logged in, so I can see add to favorites. But if I am logged out, okay, and I try to add to favorites, you see that it doesn't. We don't have the button here, which is good. All right. So the next thing is to make sure that we have this functionality. So I'm going to add here favorites to actually not. I can just say it is an array of string like that. Okay. So you could say type as well. You could say type equals an array of string like that. And now every user that we create, okay, will have this favorite. So let me correct this. Create indexes by saying here use create indexes true. Let's say create indexes. Okay, so we'll deal with that. Let me remove this from now. Right, so now when you create a user, it should bring us the favorites, at least the new users. Let me sign up here. Let's say user 52. And if I submit, and if I inspect, so we see that can look at the components, the context, and we should see the favorites. Yeah, we see that the favorites is there. So there is nothing in the user's favorites. At least we have favorites. All right. Now another thing is once we log in or once we sign in, we should just direct should just direct us to the home page. So in the sign up page, okay, we have this handle sign up, and then when we set the user to the local storage, we want to redirect. All right, we want to redirect the user by saying here import use history from, we use history from React router DOM, and we say const history, so equals use history, and we just want to say history that replace, so history that replace the home page. And the same goes for when we are logged in. So here in the login page, we can do the same, import from, okay, say use history, because the use history is a hook that we can use to navigate through the pages. So you can say use history, and after we set the user, we want to say history that replace the home page. All right, so now we create as well a new page for the favorites, right, so that the user can go to its favorites. So we can say here favorites.js, so RFCE as before, okay, and this page will be available only for users. So in our route, if there is no user, okay, we show this, but if there is a user now, only if there is a user, we say user, okay, and we show the route. So the route is favorites. All right, and for the favorites, what we need to do is we just look through the user's favorites. So in our favorites page, we can have here const user equals, you say use context. Okay, it does it for me, but if it doesn't import this for you, you have to do it manually. And we say use context, my context. Again, it does it manually, automatically, I mean. And here we say, so we need to have a way of looping through the user's favorites by saying, so user that favorites that length. So if the users, if we have something in the favorites, or if you have nothing in the favorites, so we can say not this, and we have here if, okay. What we do is we return a div that say you don't have any favorites yet. So we can have here, let's say h2, and we have a paragraph. So please add new ones. Okay. All right. So this, okay, is going to show when we don't have favorites. But when we have favorites, that's where we will have here h2, your favorites, and that's where we are going to fetch again. Okay, so because when we save to the favorites, we'll save the IDs. Okay, the ID for each mail. So we are going to fetch again, okay, through these mails, and then we'll show them. So we have an endpoint here. If you look at the mails DB, so to fetch mail by ID, we'll use this. All right. So we are going to say we need to say we need to use the use effect. Sync like this, and that this is where we will paste, okay, our endpoint. So we can just paste it like that. All right. So like this. All right. So let's see now what we have. We need as well to put it in our, actually here the route should be exact path equals / my favorites. All right. And in our navigation, so components navbar index, that's where we show here if there is a user. So user n, I can have here now, instead of just showing one, we'll have here like a fragment, and this fragment I can have another nav link. I can just copy this one, or let me just copy this one, a link container, and this link container will have inside of login my favorites and favorites like this. All right. So now we have favorites, and it says split add new ones. Yeah, so we see the text here is kind of white. Let's see why. In our favorites, okay, why is it like blank? I say h2, h3. Okay, so it's like blank. Probably it can be because of the stylings that we have in our app.js. So let's see if we are still having app.css here. And let's get back to the favorites here. Put back the h2. So inspect. So it's because of the jumbotron. So let's just make it h3. It doesn't matter in this project. So let's say h3 here. Okay. All right. So now it says you don't have any favorite yet. Split add new ones. So here, let's make it just a button. And this button, okay, it's going to be, when we click the button, it should direct us to, let's add the button here, direct us to the home page. So from Bootstrap, we say button. React Bootstrap, I mean React. All right, so please add new ones. Okay, so if you look at the navigation, which is here, so we have the link container, and let's just take this link container actually. So I can use this from React Bootstrap, React Router Bootstrap, I mean, and we can have a link container here. We can have here our link container. See why it's going on. Alright, you need to have two equals slash, and it should direct us now to the home page. So you can add here your links. So let's go back to my favorites, and if you have favorites, okay, it should now show you your favorites. But let's deal with now the mails here. Okay, so add to favorites, it should add this mail to our favorites. So we can say in our mail card, we can say here the home index mails container. So the mails card here, when you click mails model, so when you click this button, instead of handle close, we say handle add to favorites. Alright, so we create a function here, handle add to favorites equals this function. What it does, it is going to take the ID of the mail, and it should so we have here ID. It should now send it. Okay, so we say Axios. Now import Axios here from, again, Axios, and we say Axios dot post, so add favorites. All right, and now we take let's say here the ID, which means we'll now get this ID and just put it in our favorites array. So we can say here this, make it just like this. So underscore ID. Right, so that then, so the response, we want to log the response, and that catch, if you get an error, we want to log the error. Okay, but we don't have this favorite yet, so we can add it here. Actually, let's say add favorites, this, like this, and we now add the favorite. So we can say favorite or mail ID as a payload. It's better like that. It's going to be underscore ID that we send. All right, so now we create here in our routes, so user routes. So router that post, I can say add favorites. Okay, first of all, we establish the auth user to make sure that the user is authorized. Async, okay, request response. All right, and here we need to extract the, like here rec that body, we need to extract the mail ID. So const mail ID equals so rec that body. Okay, and after that, as we have the user here in our from our auth user, so we can say const user equals rec that user, to get our user. So we say user dot favorites dot push. Okay, we push the mail ID. All right, and now we await user dot save, and we send this response back. So res dot status 200 dot send. Okay, so that way we are going to have the add to favorites here. So let's see what's going on. If I refresh the page and I look for a mail and I say add to favorites, so we can inspect the network to see what's going on. Add to favorites. You see that it sends a pre-flight, okay, and then it sends the actual now request. Let's look at the response. So we have a 200 response, which means here, if you look at the data, okay, we have the data. We don't have enough. We have nothing because we haven't posted anything. All right. So if we refresh the page like that, and we look for inspect here, our component, we inspect our context, we should see now that our favorites has, all right, so it says null here. So it's not actually sending, it's sending the request, but without the mail ID here. So let's see the ID, if it is the ID or not. Okay, so let's say here console.log underscore ID. We see that it's undefined, so it's the issue is actually the ID, so it should be ID mail. So you can say here ID mail. And we say console log ID mail to see what you have. Mail ID, ID mail. All right, so see that doesn't show still. Let's look at the card. So here we are not sending the ID mail, so we say ID mail, and ID mail equals ID mail. Now we should have, so now we have the mails by ID, which is this one. All right, so let's try again. So if I look at this one and I add to the favorites, now we have to update to see like that the user it has favorites, but we'll deal with that. So if you look at the components now, the context, okay, so for the user we still have, okay, let's see, null, which is not correct. The mail model, so mail ID, look at ID mail, and we add to the favorites, so we should have the mail ID. All right, so this one we are sending it now. We can inspect our add favorites, so console.log reg.body. Again, all right, so we see that the mail ID is there. Okay, so when we push the mail ID, let's see again. We refresh. Let's inspect again. So we are having null every time. Right, guys, so here that was because actually I had a typo. I don't know if you saw it, but it should be mail ID here. Okay, so now if I add to the favorites and I refresh, we should have now the user in our favorites. All right, so this one. Okay, which is fine. So let me remove this and this one. Okay, it was just for debugging. All right, so now after we add to the favorites, we should find a way to update our user, because we should send now the new user, okay, and update it, because now we have added to the user's favorites. All right, so here instead of sending nothing, we send back the new user. And when we get that user, okay, so here by say data, which is the user, we need to set the user. Now I can say set user, and here call it set user to the data. All right, so now you can see, test to see here. I have add to favorites, and it's setting the user, okay, and now we see that okay, it's adding it. All right, so now if this is in our favorites, we want to change the button to say remove from favorites. All right, and find a way to show that the item is actually added to our favorites. So we can say after we get the user here, all right, like this. So we set the user, and we can have an alert. All right, so we can have here alert, so item or mail added to favorites, which is the first thing. So if I close it, and let's say AB search mail, let's say meet. Okay, there is something. Something is not working. Okay, let's see what's not working again. The app. So in our home, the Jumbotron. Right, so probably because of the fetch that we did, we need to replace this. There's probably like a way of solving it, but from now let's just replace it with fetch, because we kind of modified the Axios. So that then res.json. So if you guys know why it's doing that, just leave a comment below to let me know. All right, I'll be happy to know that. And at the same time, I look at why it doesn't, like the Axios itself. Even if I'm importing it from these node modules, it doesn't have the behavior it should. So now from now, let's use the fetch. Okay, so if I fetch a mail, let's say pixel. All right, so res.json, and here should be just data. pizza. Okay, so it's working now. So here, if I say see more, right, and say add to favorites, it means add it to the favorites. Okay, and it should now change this button. So in our home, the home, actually not here, the meals container, the meal card, where we have the meal model. All right. So if we need to say, okay, here another condition by saying, in this case, no, user dot favorites. All right, so that we can say have the contents. Let's see the contents. So let's try now the not the contents but the includes. So if it includes the meal ID, okay, which is ID meal, I mean, if it includes it, we know that okay, we cannot add to favorites again. So here we say this, okay. So else we have a button that say remove from favorites. Let's say here if we put just a fragment. So beware, like here we have if there is a user, okay, if there is a user n, that's where we have here the fragment, and inside we check the two button. It can be confusing, but just you can pause the video and make sure that you have it right. Right, so here let's see what we have. So if I look at this one, add to favorites, doesn't show. Right, so here actually should be the reverse. So if it is in the add to favorites like this, the button should be remove from favorites like that. So if it is in the ID meal, we want to have remove from favorites, else we should have add to favorites like this one. Okay, and you can even have like a variant. I think it should be danger to remove it from the favorites. All right, and when you click on this, it should now remove it from the favorites. So we can have here another function. So handle remove from favorites like this. Remove favorites, okay, and we take the mail ID as before, and we say here mail. Now mail removed from favorites. All right, and now this function we should call it here handle. No, not this here but here. So on click equals handle remove from favorites. All right, so Axios remove favorites, we don't have it, and here we can just copy this, actually paste it here and say remove favorites. We take as before the mail ID from the request.body, the user. This is where we will change. So we say user dot favorites equals user dot favorites dot remove, no, dot filter. So ID, and we filter out IDs that are not equal to the mail ID. So we filter out and then we assign it to the new favorite. So wizard this mail ID and we save. All right. So when we get the data from the remove from favorites, we set the user and then we alert. Okay. So let's remove from the favorites. All right. So now we have this changing. Okay. So we have deal with this. Okay, add to favorites and remove from favorites. So I can add it and I can remove from the favorites. Okay. Another thing is when it's loading, so we want to avoid sending back two requests. So here I can say have a loading here, const loading, set loading equals use state. Okay, that is by default false. And when we handle auto favorites, we want to say set loading to true. And after we get a response, all right, so here that then we set the loading to false. The same here. All right, so here we set the loading to false. And we should do the same here. So axios.post. When you get the data, we set the loading to false. The same here. Like this. And we set the loading to false as well. So when it's loading, okay, we want to disable the button. So by saying disabled equals so loading like this, and we put it here, disabled equals loading. All right, so now when it's adding to the favorites, it's kind of disabled and you cannot do anything. The same here should be, it's not doing it. Let's see, disabled. So handle remove, we want to have here set loading as well to true. All right, so add to favorites, remove from favorites. Okay, so it's working. Now the next thing here is dealing with my favorites page, the my favorites page. So that says your favorites. Okay, because we have something now, it says your favorites. So in the my favorites page, let's close all of these. Okay, and now look at for favorites. All right, so here if the user's favorites, so we have something we want to else. So here we want to say the user effect, actually we need it. So here we want to say, so when the user has some favorites, we want to fetch the data and then assign the data to a state. So we can have here const favorites set favorites equals use state. Okay, so it's just an empty array. All right, so So if we don't have any favorites, we just have this. But if, okay, the favorites has something, we can have here use effect actually. Checking. So if not user dot favorites dot length, so if you don't have, so if you have something, I mean, like this, we want to use Axios. Now, Axios from dot slash Axios, and we say Axios. Actually, we don't need this Axios. We can just use the fetch because we are fetching. So we say here fetch. All right. So we fetch the mail API. I removed it, but this one, okay. We want to look through our meals and then fetch all our meals, and then when we get that, okay, we want to assign it to the favorites. So how are you going to do this? Because we have an array of IDs, we can use the promise that all, and this promise that all we will wait for all our promises to basically resolve or reject, all right, before showing it to us. So here we can have const requests equals this, okay, user dot favorites that for each favorite we want to say, let's just say user dot map in this case. So const request, so we map through each favorite ID, and we say we return so a fetch using the link, and the ID should be the favorite. So we say you can just use here template literals like this. I can say this. Let's remove this. All right, so here we add the favorite. All right, so this is going to be a promise. Okay, so it's an array of promise, and here what I want to do is I want to spread the request so that then we get res can say console log res. All right, so here you need to add this here inside, and the user effect will have this. So let's say this like that, and the use state we import it. Let's see what we have now. Now should be favorites. Now user dot favorites dot map, All right, so let's see. So console log requests to see what we have before we say promise.all. Let's look at the favorites and let's look at the inspect to see our console. So we have an array. All right, so it says fulfilled. Okay. If I have another one here, see, add to favorites, close this one again, and we add this one, okay, close. So we have an array of promises, all right? Okay. The promise that all, it doesn't work. Let's see. So the promise that all, it takes many requests. So let's say promise that all. Actually, it's an array, so I had to do it like that. I can say request because the request is an array. All right, so now we have the response. Okay, for each promise that we send, but we actually need the the body. So here I'll say that then, okay, I get the response, and I want to return res.json. That then res.json. See now. Or we can say here res console res.json. Result equals, okay, so you can say console.log result. All right, so let's say here actually should be this. Still getting the error. Okay. So I'm going to make another one. So I can say here const promise equals promise that all. We get the request, and then we get like another one. If I say console log promise, all right. So we should get an array of requests as before. Promise that all. Say here console.log res. So here res. So all right, guys. So here the reason why it's not working is because first of all we have to have here HTTPS : / So we have a request, all right, where we use the user.favorites, we map, okay, to the favorites, and for each one we make a fetch, okay. The fetch here ends here, and after the fetch we have the .zen, the response, and we return the response.json for our request. If you look at now the request, we have a promise, okay, for each one, which is fulfilled, all right. Now this request, we don't end there. We want to return a promise, so we say, we want to get them the data by using a promise. So we say const result equals, we use the promise dot all, okay, and the request, and that then we get a response, and we want to return the response to our result. Return the response like this, and we say console.log result. All right, let's see now what we have. Oh no, again. Right, so here if I say console.log response, when we get the response, all right, so now we got the array. So here I explain again the steps. We have in our use effect, when we get the response, okay, so we are going to map through this, okay, favorites, and for each one we use the fetch inside, okay, the map, and when we get the response, that's then, okay, we make it a JSON. This is going to give us an array with promises, okay, and this array with promises, we are going to use the promise.all to fetch, to wait for all of them to resolve by saying promise.all, okay, the request is it takes an array of requests, and once all of them resolve, we console log, okay, the response. All right, so now we have here our line 15, okay, which is like the response here. Now when we get the response is going to be an array, okay. When we get the response, we say set favorites, okay, it's going to be the response. So we can remove this promise, this const promise, like this, and now we can look at our components. It's the favorites, so I can search here. This here actually the favorites, and we get the state, okay, for our 3 meals. Now we just need to show them. All right, so here you can say favorites. All right, so the favorites here, that map for each one, so we can have here a card like in our meal. So we say in the home, it's in the home, it's in the home, it's where we have the meals container, and we have the meal card. Right, so we can have here a meal card. So the meal card here, let me just copy this and paste it in our favorites because it's the same basically. All right, and here we say favorites, that map, and the meal card we just import it from our components, the meal card. Let's see now. Okay, we don't have any content. Let's inspect to see what we have for our state, the console. All right, so see the key, index home. Favorites. Right guys, so here the reason why it's doing this is if we inspect, so we have the mails. Let's see favorites. The favorites here, okay, it has where it is, so this one, so it has mails and inside you have mails. All right, so we need to find a way to extract the actual mail and not just so here JSON request. Okay, so let's just say mail. So we can use this structuring here by saying mail like this. I think so. It should be mail. Mail. So the first, so we have, look at favorites. All right, so it's an array of objects. So you have mails and inside it you have mail. So it's like mails. We can say here mails as mail. Let's see if it works. Still doesn't work. So you have the mails here and this is an array. So we need to have what's inside. So the first one. So we should say here mail 0. Actually mail 0. And we spread the mail 0 to have it. All right. So now we have the favorites. And you can just see more, remove from favorites. All right, add to favorites. So here you can just only remove from your favorites. And it should actually remove it from the favorites. So if I refresh, you should have just two ones. So what we need here is to set, let's say this, or you can refresh how to do. So let's add the favorites here so that every time that, let's say the user, I mean, every time the user changes, because when we remove from the favorites, we are going to set the user back. So let's see now, if I remove this, remove. So you see now it's updating. All right, so now you have a pretty functional application where you can, okay, add, remove. So if you look at add to favorites here, and look here for your favorites, you have this one, so you can remove it from your favorites. All right. So the challenge was to use this promise.all, right, and for each one, okay, and then show it here using this brackets notation, right? But apart from that, this is a very good application, so you can that you can add to your portfolio. You can improve it. Okay, let's say by adding here, let's say some pagination. Okay, so that if you have more than, let's say, 10 meals, you can add your pagination. All right, so there is a way to make this even better. Let's say if you log out, the login and the sign up, okay, links are not can be improved, of course. And we have as well the error messages. Let's say you are not, there is no error message here, so you can see how to show the error message by searching for it. Okay, there is a way to send back the error messages from MongoDB, but I just wanted to focus here on the connection between React and MongoDB to make this app function working correctly. All right, so I hope you like this video. So don't forget to add any comments or suggestion, and I'll see you in the next one.